Top 20 Bible Verses About Forgiveness. From Joseph forgiving his brothers. Genesis 37:28. Then Midianite traders passed by, so the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. Joseph's story begins with betrayal. His own brothers, driven by jealousy, sell him into slavery. This moment sets the stage for one of the most powerful examples of forgiveness in the Bible. Genesis 39:2. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man. Even in slavery, God remained with Joseph. This reminds us that God's presence does not leave us in painful situations, and he begins working behind the scenes toward restoration. Genesis 39:21. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor. After being falsely accused and imprisoned, Joseph still experiences God's mercy. Despite injustice, God continues to shape his heart rather than letting bitterness take over. Genesis 41:41. See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Joseph is elevated from prison to power. God turns his suffering into purpose, showing that forgiveness often grows through seasons of testing and preparation. Genesis 42:7. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he acted as a stranger to them. Years later, Joseph comes face to face with the same brothers who betrayed him. He has the power to take revenge, yet he chooses a path that leads toward reconciliation instead. Genesis 42:24. And he turned himself away from them and wept. Joseph's emotions reveal the depth of his pain. Forgiveness does not ignore hurt. It acknowledges it honestly while choosing not to act in revenge. Genesis 43:30. Now his heart yearned for his brother, so Joseph made haste and sought somewhere to weep. The process of forgiveness is not instant. Joseph wrestles with his emotions, but his heart begins to soften toward those who hurt him. Genesis 45:1. Then Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Make everyone go out from me." This is the turning point. Joseph prepares to reveal himself, showing that forgiveness often leads to vulnerability and truth. Genesis 45:4. And Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near to me." Instead of pushing them away, Joseph invites his brothers closer. Forgiveness restores relationship rather than building walls. Genesis 45:5. But now, do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. Joseph sees God's purpose beyond the pain. Forgiveness becomes possible when we trust that God can bring good out of evil. Genesis 45:7. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth. Joseph recognizes that his suffering had a greater purpose. This perspective allows him to release resentment and embrace God's bigger plan. Genesis 45:8. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God. This does not excuse their actions, but it shows Joseph's deep trust in God's sovereignty. Forgiveness grows when we shift focus from human wrongdoing to God's control. Genesis 45:14. Then he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. Reconciliation begins with love and emotion. Forgiveness opens the door for healing relationships. Genesis 45:15. Moreover, he kissed all his brothers and wept over them, and after that his brothers talked with him. Full restoration happens here. Forgiveness is completed when communication and peace are restored. Genesis 50:17. I beg you, please forgive the trespass of your brothers and their sin. Even later, the brothers still fear judgment. This shows how guilt can linger, even when forgiveness has already been given. Genesis 50:19. Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God?" Joseph refuses to take God's role as judge. Forgiveness means releasing the desire to punish and leaving justice to God. Genesis 50:20. But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. This is the heart of Joseph's story. Forgiveness is rooted in seeing God transform evil into good for a greater purpose. Genesis 50:21. Now, therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. Joseph goes beyond forgiveness by showing kindness. True forgiveness is demonstrated through actions of love. Ephesians 4:32. And be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you. Joseph's story reflects this teaching. Just as God forgives us, we are called to extend that same grace to others. Colossians 3:13, bearing with one another and forgiving one another, even as Christ forgave you, so you also must do. The life of Joseph becomes a living example of this command. Forgiveness is not easy, but it is possible when we rely on God's grace.